What does the future hold? At this time of year, I have no doubt that your phone will soon buzz or has already buzzed with something that has already created for you, filled with photos and posts and things that you put up this year. I know if you have an iPhone, it's done it. I'm talking, of course, about your 2023 retrospective. Here's the photo that you took. Do you remember when you took this trip? Do you know when you put that thing on the internet and it got the most likes? If you're anywhere on the internet, you've already seen a lot of these. And then, of course, I'm sure you've also seen the other kind of article, the one that's looking forward into 2024. All the big movies and concerts and things you can anticipate, the big programs on the calendar, the things you should be watching out for. And I actually find these kind of future-looking articles to be far more exciting and fascinating, because if there's anything the last few years have taught us, it is that they are based entirely in hope and speculation. We have no idea what is on the calendar for 2024. So let us tie together retrospect and speculate into a singular Hebrew phrase. Are you ready? Besorot tovot. You can say it. Besorot tovot. Right now, according to Mosaic magazine, the Hebrew expression of the year, that's the retrospective part of this, is Besorot Tovot, a classic Hebrew phrase found famously in the Birkat Hamazon, where we invite Elijah the prophet to bring blessings and messianic salvation. The words themselves are classically translated as either good tidings or good news, and good news with its full Western context could well be understood inside of it. But either way, in recent days, it has transcended its religious origin and sometimes Ashkenazic pronunciation of Besoros Tovos and become the new departure phrase of choice amongst Israelis from all backgrounds. How are you? Oh, you know. See you soon? Besorot Tovot. No, it doesn't really mean good news. It is not actually the announcement of anything lovely. It is a phrase that is laden with wounded sarcasm and exhaustion. It means, God, don't I need some good news? Because I'm out. And that right there is the speculative. What is going to happen to us this year? Besorot tovot. God, I need good news. The truth is, nobody knows what is coming for us as 2023 comes to an end and 2024 begins. Will it be a turn for the good? Will we finally receive some of that good news? Or will it, God forbid, be more of what we've received? And yet I would invite us this morning, rather than finding this uncertainty, this uncertainty that is anxiety-inducing and painful, I would encourage us to turn to the Torah, which this very week introduces us to the idea of finding solace in both the knowing and the not knowing of what our future holds. Twice in this week's Torah portion, as Jacob lies dying, he looks, or at least according to the rabbis, attempts to look into the future. The first happens in Genesis 47:28, according to our sage Rashi. The Parsha, the very first line of the Parsha, begins exactly where last week's left off. I quote, Jacob lived 17 years in the land of Egypt, so that the span of Jacob's life came to 147 years. That, you may be thinking, does not sound like Jacob was attempting to look into the future. But Rashi states that this is a remez. This is a hint. There is a secret to be learned here. And if you look closely at the very literal scroll, you will see that this week's Parsha, Vayechi, is what we would call a closed sidra, or a closed Parsha, which is to say that this week's Parsha begins immediately after the previous sentence of the previous parsha. There is no gap between the words. There is no space in the scroll. As Lindy can tell you, when we went looking for it yesterday, that makes it a lot more challenging to find. It has no opening. It is closed. And that is uncommon. Normally, you can identify the beginning of a parsha when you open up the scroll because it's laid out in chunky paragraphs, and you say, there it is. There's the beginning of what I'm looking for. But the closed nature of a parsha, the literal closed nature of the scroll, according to the section of the Talmud that Rashi is quoting, also represents the closed nature of the story. That Jacob is attempting to look forward in time in order to let his children know what will become of them, but he finds his vision closed by God. A closed parsha to begin this story, and closed vision that the divine insight that Jacob had throughout his life has faded. Jacob wished to reveal to his sons the date of the end of their exile, and the vision was closed to them, says Rashi. Which brings us to kind of a big question then. Why? Why is Jacob trying to peel back the curtain of the future? And the question isn't as simple as you may think, because last week in Parshat Vayigash, as Jacob finally agrees to go down to Egypt, God appears to him in a vision and tells him that it's okay to go down to Egypt, and then God tells Jacob the future. He lets him know what's going to happen to him, that he is going to go down to Egypt, that it is going to be okay, that he is going to die there in Joseph's arms, and that Joseph will one day return him and bury him next to his fathers. So Jacob has had one of these prophetic glimpses into the immediate future before. He has, for the last 17 years, when he lived in Egypt, known what will happen to him. And so, according to Rabbi Simcha Bunim of Pasicha, Jacob took a lot of comfort in that. He knew he was going to die, but everyone dies. And he knew that he was going to be surrounded by love, and not everyone is given that blessing. And he wanted that certainty of the future to be a gift he would give to his children as well. Jacob could live comfortably knowing that, my children are here in this strange land. At least I can tell them what will come to them and when they'll get to go home. I will be able to give them that same gift that God gave to me. And he quotes and says, if they knew the end, it would be so much easier to bear the burden of exile and its suffering. If you know the final date, when you finally get to go home, it's so much easier to bear the weight. And thus, from the heavens above, by closing his vision, they hinted to Jacob that things were not going to be so easy. And here we'll depart from the text and go into the minds and the hearts of the rabbis, because neither Rashi nor Rabbi Simcha Bunim are actually talking about the exile in Egypt. They are speaking about their own exile. They're speaking about their own lives. They're speaking about their own long period in galut, in diaspora, where for Rashi it has been 1,000 years, where for Rabbi Simcha Bunim it has been 1,700 years. And they're not really talking about Jacob and his children. They're talking about their own communities. They're praying out loud and saying, will we know? Will we see the end of exile? Will we, the Jews of France, or the Jews of the Pale of Settlement, one day, will we be a free people? Will we be able to go home? And Rabbi Simcha Bunim's heartbreaking answer is, if only we knew. If only we knew how much longer this would last, we would make it through. And heaven is not willing to give us the answer to that question. Heaven is not willing to answer Rashi. It's not willing to answer Rabbi Simcha Bunim. And I'll break the news to you. Heaven's not answering us either. Heaven's not going to let us know when this war is over. And heaven's not going to let us know when the terrible increase that we're experiencing in anti-Semitism here in Canada will end all over the world. Just like our ancestors, we have to fight. And just like our ancestors, we have to endure without knowing the final date. One of my dearest friends is a neuroscientist. And over drinks, he would usually tell me about the lab he was working in and the case studies that he was learning over. And once he told me about an experiment that his lab had conducted about a human being's ability to endure discomfort. They had set up a test wherein people would put their hands into freezing cold water, ice cold water. And in the first experiment, the person was told nothing. Only, the water is very cold, put your hand in for as long as possible. But the second group was told the exact same thing. The water is very cold, put your hand in for as long as possible. But across from the tank of water was a timer that they could clearly see that would count down from 100. And the first group, that has no reference for how long they need to endure the cold water, nor how long they've already had their hand in the cold water at all, overwhelmingly pulled their hand out far faster than the second group. In the group that could see the timer, many of them even strove to reach 100 seconds, even though the researchers never explained to them that they were going to need to make 100 seconds. The scientists had only ever told them, keep your hands in the water for as long as possible. The instruction was always the same, but the inference that once that timer reaches 0, that's the time we're looking for, gave them the strength to withstand that discomfort. The inference that there was a time when discomfort would come to an end, but more than that, that there was a planned time for it to come to an end. It gave those human beings extra endurance. And those who had no frame of reference for how long their suffering would last, they found themselves unable to endure. How alike, then, human beings are today to our ancestors. Our ancestors also just wanted a glimpse so that they could endure, until the time came for God to bring them home. And that maybe is why Jacob is asking for a glimpse of the future. And yet, maybe that glimpse is not actually what we need. The Lord Rabbi Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory also reads this very parsha, and he also reads that same section of Rashi, and he comes to a fundamentally opposite conclusion. He looks into the second time that Jacob attempts to perceive the future, and notes that Jacob says as he is dying, "Gather around, I will tell you what happens to you in the days to come." Only for what his next few words to be are not answers, are not prophetic visions, they're just blessings. They're hope for the future. They're inspirational wishes from a dying father to his beloved children, because heaven has once again been silent. But where Rashi and Rabbi Simcha Bunim despair at the silence of heaven, Lord Sacks says the following: the silence of heaven on the future is no minor detail. It is a fundamental feature of Jewish spirituality. We believe that we cannot predict the future when it comes to a human being, because we make the future by our choices. The script has not been written, and the future is radically open. Lord Sacks compares this version of Jewish spirituality, this vision of Jewish free will, with the Greek concept of fate. In Greece, there are oracles, and the oracles give prophecies, and the prophecies cannot be escaped, though inevitably people try to escape, and then they fail to escape, and we've coined an entire word for trying and failing to escape fate. Do you know what it is? Tragedy. Tragedy. Tragedy is the attempt to try and escape your fate. And yet, I quote the rabbi again, astonishingly, given the many centuries of Jewish suffering, Biblical Hebrew has no word for tragedy. Sachs clarifies that a tragedy is a drama with a sad outcome that involves a hero destined to experience destruction. And Judaism rejects destiny because we believe in the power of human beings, because we believe in a loving, benevolent God who we are in covenant with, who does not cheaply expend our lives like a Grecian deity. And more than that, we do not believe that God has bound us to some inevitable fate. The rabbi writes, we are free because God is free, and God made us in the divine image. That is what is meant by the three words that God says to Moses at the burning bush when God is asked for his name. God replies, Yeh asher yeh. I will be who and how I choose to be. I am the God of freedom. I will not be predicted. And he continues saying, do not believe that the future is written. It is not. The proof is us. The proof is the Jewish people itself. The first reference to Israel outside the Bible is engraved on the Menapta stele, which is inscribed around 1225 BCE, before the year 0, by the pharaoh Mernaptah IV, who was the direct successor to Ramses II. Do you know what it reads? It reads, Israel is laid waste. Her seed is no more. It was an obituary. The Jewish people have been written off many times by their enemies, and they remain, after almost 4 millennia, young and strong. Sachs concludes by saying that this is why, when Jacob wanted to tell his children what would happen to them in the future, that the divine gift of foresight fled. Our children will always surprise us, as we surprise others. We are made in the image of God. We are made free. Sustained by the blessings of God, we can become greater than anyone, even ourselves, could ever foresee. 3 great rabbis in 3 very different eras, each wondering, can we know what is coming? Will we know Besorot Tovot? Will we know the good news, the good tidings? And it seems for the very first time in any time I've ever given a sermon where I quote 3 rabbis, they all agree. No, you won't know what's coming. But of course, why they agree is very different. Rashi and Rabbi Simcha Bunim don't understand why heaven is withholding answers from us. Rabbi Sachs doesn't believe that heaven is withholding anything from us at all, because everything is still and always possible. A new year comes. Will things get any better? Besorot tovot? I don't know. But like Rabbi Simcha Bunim, I know that we have to endure, even if we have no clear answers, no flashing countdown clock. We must be resilient, and we must be compassionate at our fraying edges, and we must love our allies, and we have to name our enemies, because they've had no problem naming us this year. And like Rabbi Sachs, I know that the future is open. I know that no matter what anyone says, we are not doomed, and we are not dying, and we are not powerless. And I would ask you all to remember this, not to forget it for a single moment, that our broken-hearted Rashi and our broken-hearted Simcha Bunim, they yearned for this very day. They yearned for this very day that we live in right now. This time we live in is remarkable. It is miraculous. It is incredible. It is difficult. And it was never promised. It was never assured. It was never fated. It is something that we have made because we are free. And that the only defeat that is fated is the one that will come when we give up on each other and when we give up on our dream. Lihiyot am chofshi be'artzenu. Besorot tovot. Good news? Yes. Because this year we will make it for ourselves. Shabbat shalom.